Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Apalachicola Chattahoochee Flint River Basin Drought and Water webinar for the month of November. My name is Rachel McGuire. I'm with the Auburn University Water Resources Center located in Auburn, Alabama. If you're new to this webinar, we'll have designated time at the end after all of our speakers for comments, questions, and any discussion. Please feel free to use the question box on the GoToWebinar tool panel throughout the webinar to type in your questions. You can also use the raise your hand icon on that same tool panel. Our speakers today will be David Zierden, the Florida State climatologist with the Florida Climate Center at Florida State University, speaking on our current drought status, seasonal forecasts, and outlooks. We have Michael Harper from the Alabama Office of Water Resources, speaking on behalf of the state of Alabama. We have Paul Ancorn, a hydrologist with the USGS South Atlantic Water Science Center, speaking on our stream flows and groundwater conditions. We have Samantha Lucas from the Apalachicola National Estuarine Research Reserve, speaking about Apalachicola-based salinity. We have Jody Juan of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Mobile District with our ACF reservoir conditions. And we'll finish up with Jeff Dober with the NOAA National Weather Services Southeast River Forecast Center with our streamflow forecast for the basin. Speakers, give me a cue when you're ready for your next slide. And with that, I am going to turn it over to our first speaker, David Zierden, when you're ready, David.
There we go. I was unable to unmute. Do you hear me now?
Yes, we do.
Okay, great. We'll go ahead and get started, and we'll start with the kind of wrap up of the Atlantic hurricane season. And for all practical purposes, I believe this season is over. Since our last webinar, there's only been one tropical system in the Atlantic Basin, and that was Tropical Storm Wanda, that actually just wandered around in the Atlantic for about a week, pardon the pun. But that was the last storm we've seen in the Atlantic Basin. As we all know, the official end date for the hurricane season is November 31st. But also interestingly, it's kind of the entire globe and northern hemisphere has been quiet. There's been no storm in any basin of hurricane strength since October 30th. And according to Phil Klotzbach, there's only been 2 years since the satellite era when we have not had a hurricane strength storm in the same time period. But just keep in mind, we all here in the Panhandle and Tallahassee do remember Hurricane Kate, which actually made landfall on as late as November 21st in 1985 and did a good bit of damage along the Panhandle coast and even the city of Tallahassee. But with this strong cold front that's just pushed through, I show a satellite image over on the right. That's going to really keep the Gulf and the Caribbean quiet for the remainder of the hurricane season for sure. So with that, we'll go to the next slide and start looking at recent temperature and precip patterns across the Southeast. Here I show temperature departures from normal since the first of the month, since November 1st over on the left. We see it's actually been a little bit cooler than normal, with temperatures ranging from 1 to 3 degrees below normal for the first part of November. At the same time, we've continued this drying trend that we saw in our last webinar, and this shows deficits, rainfall deficits on the right since the start of November, or rainfall departures from normal, I should say, because as you get into the Florida Peninsula and the Florida Big Bend and even the coast of Georgia, we see positive anomalies or more rainfall than normal, especially for the peninsula of Florida, which is unusual for this time of year. But throughout the ACF basin and Alabama and Georgia, we see deficits from anywhere from 1.5 to 2 to 3 inches or more. So with that, we'll go to the next slide and start looking at the drought situation here in the ACF Basin in the southeast. And kind of a broken record, we continue to be drought free in the ACF Basin, but drought is starting to creep in the coastal Carolinas, where now we've got an expanding area of even D1 or moderate drought along coastal North Carolina and South Carolina, and even into the Appalachians and Piedmont area. So drought is starting to build and intensify in the Carolinas. So on the next slide, we'll take a look at our familiar lawn and garden moisture index from University of Alabama, Huntsville. And it shows a lot of what I was just talking about. The Florida Peninsula is mostly moister than normal and has a good moisture supply. But we see that line along the Florida Big Bend where the Florida Panhandle, central Georgia and South Alabama are all starting to really dry out. And also what's significant is now that we are into November and entering December, the amount of effective precipitation that drives this index drops significantly from the summertime water demand. So now it's based on only around a ½ inch to an inch of rainfall over a 2 to 3 week period. So it's a drying time. The water demand's not as high, but even so, this lawn and garden index is showing drying conditions across the lower and middle ACF. On the next slide, we'll start taking a look at recent rainfall, and these are the radar estimates from the last 7 days. And we see really no measurable rainfall at all along the Florida Big Bend and southeast Georgia. Elsewhere in the ACF, only fractions of an inch in the lower and middle ACF basin, still amounts less than an inch even in the upper basin and headwaters area. So we've seen a dry week with the series of cold fronts that we've been experiencing. On the next slide, we'll take a look a little further back at 30-day precipitation totals over on the left side. And we see a lot of, here we see the abundant rainfall across North Florida, Southeast Georgia, and the Florida Peninsula. But as we get in it further west and north into the ACF Basin, really only amounts of generally less than 2 inches across the entire ACF Basin. So this really illustrates this drying trend we've seen even at this climatologically dry time of the year. And over on the right just shows the rainfall departures from normal over the same time period, 30 days. And you see much above normal for the Florida Peninsula and the Georgia coast. But then you see that really well-demarked line that switches over to below normal precipitation for much of the ACF Basin and the remainder of Georgia and Alabama. So we'll go on to the next slide, and this again is 90-day departures from normal radar estimates. And this tells the story that we've been repeating most of the summer and through the fall, is that it's generally above normal rainfall over much of the tri-state area, and especially the Florida Panhandle, the Alabama coastal areas, but even up through inland Georgia and Alabama, mostly above normal to normal rainfall. So really no accumulating deficits at the 90-day time frame. However, the coastal Carolinas really stick out as being quite dry over that same time period. So with that, we'll go ahead and start looking ahead. And with this strong cold front that just pushed through, it looks like it's going to keep things clear and dry over the next 7 days. Very little rainfall forecast for the southeast and Florida and the ACF Basin as high pressure really sets in. On the next slide, we'll start taking a look at the state of the Pacific Ocean and our seasonal forecast. And as we talked about in our last webinar, the La Nina phase is back in full swing again. We see the really strong negative sea surface temperature anomalies off the coast of South America and along the equator, really starting to get the look of a well-developed La Nina. If we look at the Nino 3.4 index down there at the bottom, now it's hovering around negative 1.0 degrees Celsius, which is kind of getting towards the range of at least a moderately strong La Nina. So it's returned in full force this year, just as it was present most of last winter and spring. So on the next slide, just again, it didn't transfer properly, but just a reminder that we were in the La Nina phase last winter and spring, and that these multi-year La Ninas are really the exception and not the rule. We see that 1989 La Nina event, which was more of a one-year event, but all the others usually generally last 2 to 3 years, and they wane during the summer months, but then pick up steam again in the fall and winter. And that's what we're seeing again this year. So we'll go to the next slide and look at the official forecast for the Pacific Ocean going through the winter and spring. And now we see this forecast has even strengthened over or become more confident since our last webinar. Now there's 95% chance or better that it'll continue at least through November, December, January timeframe, and even a 70% chance or more that it'll continue through the spring, through the February, March, April season. So well-developed La Nina in place, forecast to really impact our weather and climate patterns through the winter and into the spring. And over on the right are the different model forecasts for that Nino 3.4 region. And we see they all agree that in colder than normal ocean temperatures, the vast majority of them are below the La Nina threshold at negative ½ degrees Celsius, and the model consensus is around negative 1 degree Celsius. So the models are converging on the continuation of at least a moderately strong La Nina conditions. So on the next slide, just a reminder, these are the typical La Nina impacts across North America during the winter months. As I said in our last webinar, we really didn't see these kind of patterns materialize last year, but this is a different year, and it's still the best forecast. And especially if you look at the Pacific Northwest, where they've experienced a series of storm systems and atmospheric river events, that's very much in line with the classic La Nina pattern that tends to steer these storms into that region of the country. And also you notice the drier than normal down here in the southeast, and we're certainly starting to experience that also. So on the next slide, with that in mind, this is the latest seasonal outlook for December, January, and February from NOAA's Climate Prediction Center. And just like last webinar, a very strong forecast for warmer than normal temperatures across the southeast and the ACF basin, and also a fairly strong forecast for below normal precipitation, especially in the middle and lower ACF basin and the peninsula of Florida. It gets a little foggier as we go into the upper ACF and North Alabama, North Georgia, where it's kind of that transition between the traditional storm tracks that occur during La Nina winters and where the drier than normal conditions occur. So on our last slide, I think we'll take a look at the seasonal drought outlook. Seeing as much of the eastern United States is not in drought, not a lot to say. Those areas in the Carolinas are forecast that the drought will persist. But something that is new in last month's seasonal drought outlook, they had the Florida Peninsula shaded in that yellow shade that drought development was likely. Well, with the plentiful rainfall we've had over the last month over the state of Florida, that's been removed now. And even Florida, there's no forecast for drought development in the next 1 to 3 months. So with that, we'll go ahead and wrap it up. The hurricane season seems to be ending quietly for all practical purposes. The month of November has brought slightly cooler temperatures and below normal rainfall to much of the southeast and the ACF Basin. The ACF Basin is entirely drought-free, but development does continue for the coastal Carolinas and into the Piedmont areas. Dry conditions over the last 30 days for most of Alabama and Georgia. Florida Peninsula and coastal Georgia are the exceptions where they've actually had above normal rainfall. Florida, Alabama, and Georgia, all three states are mostly above normal precipitation at the 90-day time frame. The La Nina advisory continues as it's going strong in the Pacific Ocean. Over a 90% chance it lasts through the winter and a 70% chance it lasts through the spring. And based on the La Nina forecast, the CPC seasonal forecast heavily favors above normal temperatures and below normal rainfall for the region. And no drought development is forecast over the next 1 to 3 months.
Thank you, David. And now we'll hear from Michael Harper on the state of Alabama input. When you're ready, Michael.
Okay, go ahead. So as you see here, for the first time in several months, we actually have a little color showing up now in the state of Alabama drought monitor map with some D0. We're hearing talks this week of seeing that expand quite a bit in the new drought monitor coming out this week. So we'll see what that plays out when we see the final draft of that. Next. And so seeing as we haven't had anything on our map in quite a while, our drought declaration that was issued in May the 11th, it's still current with showing the entire state of Alabama being with no drought declaration of any kind. Next. Just a reminder, we have our drought planning and response website where we post information as far as like water availability issues, anything that we hear from systems or from anyone in the state. As of right now, there are none, but just a reminder, it's where we keep all of our information. So in summary, real quick, based on what we're seeing now, we did see some D0 introduced in West Central Alabama. We are hearing word that that area is going to be expanded this week, so we'll have to keep an eye on things. The declaration is still showing 0 drought for the state of Alabama. There are no reported water availability issues, and we are continuing to monitor conditions daily. So if you, one more slide here. As far as meetings goes, we have nothing scheduled at this time. We're waiting and watching conditions, and as conditions warrant, we'll pull our monitoring and impact group back together and start our regular meeting process again, but hopefully not for a while. So,
thank you, Michael.
You're welcome.
Now we'll hear from Paul Inkhorn on our stream flows and groundwater conditions.
Okay, thanks, Rachel. Good afternoon, everybody. We'll begin as we usually do by looking at real-time stream flow across the southeast. So you see not a lot of change from our last webinar. Current conditions as of this morning is shown on the right there, and you can see pretty much across Alabama, Georgia, and Western South Carolina, conditions are relatively normal with regard to the long-term average. We are seeing low flows in coastal Carolinas, North and South Carolina, as David pointed out. But focusing in on the ACF, majority of our gauges here are showing normal conditions. So next slide. We'll take a look at the below normal 7-day average stream flow. This is an indication of hydrologic drought. And you can see that both Alabama and Georgia are showing no areas of hydrologic drought. We have seen some change there in coastal South and North Carolina, where we're showing below normal and even moderate hydrologic drought. But as far as ACF Basin goes, we are hydrologic drought free. Next slide. Thanks. We're looking here at the 28-day averaged flow compared to historic values. The black line there is showing basically the trend for the last 28 days, and these are Lake Lanier inflows. So starting with Chattahoochee near Cornelia, our last webinar, our flows were in the much above normal. And for both Cornelia and Dahlonega, Chestatee River that is, you'll see declining flows since our last webinar. These are the direct results of the rainfall deficit that we've seen across the northern portion of the ACF. So you can see here too, Chattahoochee at Atlanta and Whitesburg, same pattern. We've moved from much above normal into normal conditions. Here's Chattahoochee at West Point and Columbus. Same thing there, 28-day average flow is showing it normal. And next slide, we'll look at Flint River. So again, it's interesting here. We're just about to start the recharge that we see during the winter months here. And what you can see, both Griffin and Carsonville are showing normal conditions, and they've pretty much plateaued. So we would hope to see, as David pointed out, the next 90 days, some additional rainfall, and then we can get the 28-day average flow to start following what we have seen as local trends. All right, next slide. This is Flint River at Albany and Bainbridge. Both stations here are showing flow in the normal condition. And next slide, Apalachicola River at Chattahoochee, again showing normal conditions for the 28-day average flow. Okay, now we'll look at groundwater. So on the right, we're seeing conditions from our real-time network, and you can see that the southern portion of the ACF groundwater conditions are mostly in the above normal, and that's pretty much the same story for the whole basin. Few gauges are showing normal conditions, and then one just north of Atlanta and south of Columbus are showing to be below normal. All right, so we'll look at our two reference stations. So this is Miller County. So we see in the last 30 days typical fluctuations that we typically see there, and that when plotted against I guess historic data, we're ranking at above normal for the Miller County well. And we'll look at the next slide. This is Dougherty County, and the same story there. We're showing above normal groundwater elevation. All right, the last slide. We'll just wrap up with our summary here. So streamflow conditions in the ACF basin currently ranked from much above normal to much below normal. Below normal 7-day average streamflow indicates the ACF to be drought-free. The 28-day average streamflow for the Chattahoochee River currently rank in normal range, as well as the Flint River. And then real-time groundwater levels at our reference stations both currently show data to be above normal. All right, Rachel, that concludes it. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Now we'll hear from Jody Juan with the ACF reservoir conditions.
Thank you, Rachel. Go to the next slide. So beginning at the top of the ACF basin, we have Beaufort Dam and Lake Lanier. So currently we are in our winter drawdown for the winter pool levels, and we are on track for it. Given that we haven't had much rain, we're able to manage the water pretty well over up at Beaufort Dam. We're expecting to hit to end our winter drawdown pool on December 1st, and the pool elevation that we're trying to hit is 1070.00 feet. Next slide, please. At West Point, we are also in the middle of our winter drawdown pool. The only difference between the Beaufort and West Point is West Point's end of winter drawdown date is December 15th. And it looks like we're going to be on track, even slightly above the pool elevation, and that's great to hear, just in case we do continue to be a little bit drier than normal going into December. For Walter F. George has the same winter drawdown end date of December 1st as Beaufort. It looks like we are on track to make that date, and we are looking to reach a pool elevation of 188 for Walter F. George. Lastly, we have Jim Woodruff. Woodruff looks like it's maintaining a pretty steady pool elevation between 76.5 and 77. We're slightly above for the next week or so, just because we are trying to evacuate that water from the upper projects, and it looks like everything looks like it's going pretty well so far. In terms of our ACF Basin composite conservation and flood storage, we're expected to be in zone 1 for the next 5 weeks. In conclusion, all ACF Basin projects are currently in their winter pool elevation drawdown. Lake Lanier is currently on track, as well as all of the other basins below it. All projects are within zone 1, and we are currently meeting all downstream minimum flow requirements. The ACF system conservation storage as a whole is in zone 1 and is forecasted to remain there for the next 5 weeks.
Thank you, Jody.
Thank you.
And now we'll hear from Sam Lucas with Apalachicola Bay Salinity.
All right, thank you, Rachel, and hi, everyone. This month, we'll have an update from October 12th through November 2nd. But before we get into that, just in case there's any new listeners, we're going to be focusing in on 3 of our water quality stations. We have one in East Bay, which functions as a nursery area of the system, and then one at Cat Point and Dry Bar. And both these stations are located on historic oyster bars. Our water quality stations collect data all year long at 15-minute intervals. But first up, we're going to check out our Cat Point salinity levels. All right, so for Cat Point, as of November 2nd, we're currently in the 10th to 24th percentile range. There really hasn't been any dramatic increases or decreases for the last few weeks. Nothing too crazy. As David Zierden said, you know, we're out of that storm season, so we're not seeing really high salinity levels or really low salinity levels during this period. It is, it's pretty steady at Cat Point. Now, when I go ahead, we're going to get ready and look at our Dry Bar and East Bay Bottom stations. Now, these ones are influenced a little differently than Cat Point. They are really influenced by precipitation and river flow due to their location in the system. So for these ones, because we haven't had much precipitation during this time period and the river flow has gone down, we're seeing increased salinity levels. And both these stations maxed out at around Halloween, and Dry Bar got up to 32 parts per thousand, as you can see right there. And I'll be interested to see what is going on for the rest of the month. We'll actually be going out and switching our loggers next week if the weather works out correctly. And we can go ahead and move on to our East Bay Bottom now as well. All right, now as you see for East Bay Bottom, very similar to Dry Bar, the same trend, a pretty high increase, and this one maxed out at 25 parts per thousand. So again, this is just due to lower precipitation and not a lot of river flow. These are just impacted due to how the river runs through the system. And Cat Point we don't really see those impacts at Cat Point, so that's why it's kind of leveled out at that station. And we can go ahead and move on to the next slide, please. All right, and that's just the summary. Cat Point values are rather low, and we had that one large increase at Dry Bar and East Bay Bottom. But again, I'll be interested to see what's going on for the rest of the month. But thank you so much.
Thank you, Sam. And now Jeff Dober is going to take us home with the streamflow forecast for the ACF.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. So we'll start us off with the 10-day river forecasts, and this is the projected inflows into Lake Lanier using the North American Ensemble Forecast System. And you can see, for the most part, the scale shows, you see the bumps there, but the scale is pretty small, running from roughly 750 CFS to a couple thousand CFS. So these are small, potentially small scale bumps as far as inflows into Lake Lanier. So overall looks pretty dry here through the end of the month, and then to start off the December season. So we can go to the next slide here. And this is November 22nd through December 1st. And you can see pretty much not expecting any large scale events and certainly not any flooding here on the middle Chattahoochee at Whitesburg. Next slide. And this holds true again on the upper Flint here at Lovejoy. Pretty much flat, indication of the dry weather we're expecting over the next week. And we'll go down the Flint to Albany, the next slide. And again, we're pretty much expecting flat. And then finally, on the Apalachicola at Blountstown, we can see here on the next slide, again, representative of the entire basin, the general dry trend and little fluctuations in flow expected through the end of the month. So we can go to the next slide. So that's what it looks like over the next 10 days. As far as the river flood climatology, we're in week 47. And this is for the Georgia group. This sort of is a time period we start to see the primary recharge period, and we start to pick up on as far as river flood events in the basin. And we go to the next slide. And but for the most part, looking at the month of December, we're calling for near normal stream flows. Now, we've had the dry weather here recently, and as Jody has pointed out, our reservoirs are sitting pretty healthy. As Paul has pointed out, you know, the stream flows that we have had where we were above and well above normal from really spring all the way into late summer, that sort of has given us a little bit of spending money as far as the stream flows with the dry weather here in the fall and the autumn period. And so instead of being below normal, we're really falling into near normal conditions. Now, as Paul pointed out, we are heading into the recharge period here, and those normals will start to tick upward as we go into the middle to end of the winter season. And so the dry weather could be more of a concern as we go later in the winter if the dry trends continue. We go to the next slide here, and we'll show you the 3-month outlook that we're expecting December now through February. And our ensemble streamflow plots show the highest probabilities are for the percentages to be in the near normal. That you can see 40% chance or greater at all our locations at near normal conditions, and then you know, about a quarter to a third % chance that will be in below normal to or above normal, those other two categories. So for the most part, we're expecting stream flows to remain near the normal range heading in through most of the wintertime period and into the heart of the wintertime period here across the ACF basin at this current time. And so in summary, we're not expecting any flood in the next 10 days. And then as far as the 1 month and 3 month streamflow forecast, we're going to continue that near normal forecast through most of the winter. And that's all I had from the forecast streamflow side. I'll pass it back to you, Rachel.
Thank you, Jeff. At this point, I'm going to open up the floor for any questions, comments, or discussion. So if you have questions, feel free to type them in the question box, or you can use the hand icon to raise your hand and I will unmute you to ask your question. Okay, I don't see any questions, but you still have some time. I'll take just another minute. And during that time, I'd like to thank our speakers once again, David Searden, Michael Harper, Paul Ancorn, Jody Wan, Sam Lucas, and Jeff Dober. I do want to make sure everybody knows that our December 28th webinar is canceled. Therefore, our next webinar will start in the new year on Tuesday, January 25th, same time, 1 p.m. Eastern, 12 p.m. Central. We'll post a recording of this webinar on YouTube, and it will be included in a summary email you will receive later today, complete with today's slides and information. Thank you everyone for being here, and have a happy Thanksgiving.